If anybody has more questions for Rebecca, you can post them in the QA. Just make sure you say for Rebecca. Okay, Blanca, next to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Blanca. She's originally from Spain. She's an artist, curator, and critic. She recently graduated from the San Francisco Art Institute with a Master of Arts in History and Theory of Contemporary Art. And her thesis was awarded Outstanding Thesis Award. Okay, all yours.
Thank you, Piero. Well, thank you everyone for being here. And thank you for inviting me to speak this evening at Laser Talks. As it has been introduced, I'm gonna be talking about this thesis work that I wrote, and it's entitled Listening to the Implements. What this is an artistic sensibility to think of how the sounds that surround us are connected with us. So it's a question on the multiplicity of meanings that the sound have in a public sphere, and also it's a question about the paradox of silence as a phenomenal thing, and also as a concept. So similar to a landscape, a soundscape is a space we all contribute to, and that ultimately is revealing information about ourselves. And I would like to say that I use sound to think of how we coexist with each other in the public sphere. In this sense, it's the public space is a space that belongs to everyone but to nobody at the same time. So I also observe on how we coexist with each other and how we create a space for connectedness or for isolation in terms of sound. And this bidirectional relationship gives clues on how we behave in the public sphere. That being said, I would like to introduce a theory by the scholar and activist Anahit Kasabian of distributed subjectivities. This theory understands that we are all connected in a sound wave in the place that we'll share together, and sound is affecting us as subjects to a place. It is configuring us as subjects. This means that the sounds that we encounter in the public sphere are not individual separated structures, but all conform to a network of sounds that ultimately is broader than ourselves. These sounds that we find are affecting us, but we are also affecting that wave. So all connected in this web of sounds, we have a tool to appreciate or think about that connection, which is listening to them. But that being said, I will just state that I moved to San Francisco in 2018, and since I moved to this city, I noticed that there's a huge presence of headphones everywhere. And the amount of people that I will see while commuting and walking around the city wearing headphones was bigger than I expected or my previous life experiences. And thinking of how we coexist with each other in this space in terms of sound, I really noticed that this reflects the self-centered society we live in. And with the aid of certain auditory technologies, we are advocating for independent, self-curated soundscapes where we don't have to listen to each other's sounds. And even if we are listening to something that is not about ourselves, we are living the unexpected totally out of our sound spectrum. So if listening is this place or this ability we have to find place for connectedness or for isolation, I wonder how the act of listening can have the opposite reaction, non-listening, when the sounds that we encounter in the everyday are considered loud or uncomfortable or noisy, which leads into the question of what noise really is. And the many definitions that I found towards noise, they go from unwanted sound to unexpected sound. And all these definitions definitely treat noise as an invasion of your own space, as something that is not welcome. But we have to think that 100 years ago in 1913, noise was a symbol for the futurist, and it was something welcome, something to want and to expect. Um, Not that long ago, in the late 70s, the social theorist Jacques Attali said that noise indicates the limits of a territory and the way to make oneself heard within it. This means that noise is an ability we have to make ourselves heard. And he continued by saying that since noise is a source of power, power always has listened to noise with fascination. And I keep questioning this sentence and thinking that if power decides to silence noise, that action is also authoritative, and it becomes a manifestation of dominance. So I keep questioning then, should we listen to noise or to silence? Is power then silent or noisy? And really the answer, I think the answer is none in this binary code, but exercising power is in itself about listening. Um, so that being said, the more inward we get into our own sonic landscapes, the more we try to become silent. It seems to me that we are kind of creating a future of hygienic soundscapes where the unexpected becomes muted. That diversity, or the unexpected diversity, becomes muted. And we continue to mute places and mute others. Perhaps should we start listening to silence, right? Which goes to another question in the field of art and in the field of music and sound studies of what silence really is. In the last century, in the 50s, after the famous phrase of John Cage that there's no such thing as silence, when he experienced the anechoic chamber, really flipped the concept of silence from quietness to loudness. And there's another important contribution to this notion, which is the concept we have of listening. And in the same time period, also the composer and artist Paulina Oliveros flipped the concept of listening from low consciousness to high consciousness. She introduced a philosophy of deep listening that understand sound as that network bonding us together, and understand listening as relationship, listening as care, something to try to empathize with each other when we are sharing a space that, as I said before, is for all and for nobody at the same time. So once we know there's no such thing as silence, at least in the soundscape, the only way we have to experience silence, it's between the limits of its own concept. And the silence will be an absence of sound, parenthesis, perhaps a lack or a negative space, something we can momentarily perceive as a lack, yet it is still sounding. So aside from silence, from the concept in semantics, as the theorist, sound theorist, as well as Salome Boeglin states, silence is not the absence of sound, but the beginning of listening. Therefore, silence as a semantical signifier does not signify any physical silence, but the concept of a desire. And understanding silence as a desire, perhaps this silence is an ideology containing sound that has been muted for negotiated meaning and social constructs. So the desire for a silent soundscape does not understand silence as the beginning of listening, but as its end. For that, I kept questioning then, should I listen to silence? And what is silence after all? What constitutes that silence? To answer this question, I would like to introduce a concept that perhaps many know. It's the concept of the infratheme or the inframeans that you saw in the title of this work. It was a concept that was introduced by Marcel Duchamp, and it's a phenomenological experience that we experience in life. He described this through many examples in a list, like the one you're seeing right now. The warmth of a seat which has just been left is infratheme, and he could not describe this through theory because he understood it's experience that takes so little of space and time that we are not able to theorize it. So like you're seeing in the video right now, there's many moments when the ice is melting into water. It's a continuum of influences happening. Why I introduce this term? Well, because I will take this concept of the inframeans as the silence that I'm not able to reach, as the in-between of my soundscape and other soundscapes, as a way to understand my sonic sameness, the sounds that are similar to me, that I'm familiar with, to understand what sounds perhaps I'm leaving out of my spectrum, and to try to listen to the unheard. And what is the unheard? There's many ways we can approach this concept, like materially or metaphysically or socially, but perhaps it's that sound where it's beyond our sensorial capabilities, or perhaps it's that sound that is still existing that we are not paying attention to because of precisely attention deprivation. But what I try to do with this questioning and with this theorizing of sound with words is acknowledging the existence of sounds beyond our own soundscape, beyond ourselves. To bring all this theory into a practice, I designed a listening score that pretty much is influenced by Paulino Oliveros' deep listening and sonic meditation scores, and which are text-based listening scores that anyone without musical notation background could carry on. So this was a performance I did at the beginning of this year in January, February in San Francisco. And the goal of the performance was to seek for silence, to try to find silence. And I decided to do this in one of the, in my opinion, loudest places of the city, which is the intersection of the 24th Street and Mission Street, in the neighborhood of the Mission. And I will just sit there for 5 minutes and walk around the neighborhood trying to find silence, knowing it's not possible. So you're seeing now the notation of the sounds that I was taking. And what I realized is that the diversity of sounds was huge. So I wasn't able to translate all my subjective experiences into the paper as fast as I will like. So for that, I decided to do this walk, which by the way take 1 hour, in reiterations. The first reiteration I did of the walk, I decided to just write down the sounds with a symbol-based language. And I just had 2 categories in the first reiteration, one for noise and one for silence. So I assigned this the symbol for noise and a symbol for silence, and do the walk again. You're seeing now on the screen the result of this first reiteration, where I started by the left in 24 in Mission, and then I ended up an hour later in the right in Balmy Alley. So what I did when I did this, it was very frustrating because I found the symbol for noise inadequate to ascribe some of the sounds, because they were not considered uncomfortable, or they were not considered loud, or unwelcome. And also the symbols for silence were not either silence at all. There was this impasse between a louder soundscape to a quieter soundscape. There was perhaps the influences that happened between sounds. So I decided to do a second reiteration of the walk, where I included 2 new sounds, music and voice. The reason why I included these 2 specific sounds was because they were repeating themselves a lot in the previous walk. So I wanted to know what happened now with the symbol of noise. And this is the original notebook. This is the second reiteration. And again, still there were times where I would write noise, but they were not noise. And same thing with silence. What was silence before just became another kind of sound, and the same thing for noise. And I did the last one, another day and another hour length, where I included these new 2 sounds, vehicle engines and unexpected sound. So the reason why I included these two, it's because vehicle engines are normally considered noise, and unexpected sound was one of the definitions that noise has. So I wanted to know, what is my unexpected sound? What sonic biases do I have? What kind of concept do I have towards society when I listen to it? And this is the final reiteration after I included all the symbols. And what I realized, or what I concluded after I finalized, is that all these exemplifications show how we normally tend to impose moral impositions into what is noise, or what should be noise and what should be silence. I also concluded the absurdity of aggregating categories, and also the absurdity of just having a binary code to describe all the multiplicity of sounds that are there. It also can make us aware of our sonic biases towards society, our sonic agency we have in listening to other or not. And I can conclude, of course, I didn't find silence, but the whole idea of the work is to acknowledge the existence of other sounds out there that perhaps we're not able to listen, but it doesn't mean that they're not there, and trying to find through sound and in a space where we'll share together the spaces for connectedness and instead of for isolation. Yeah, and that's the work. Thank you so much.
Well, fantastic. I'll tell you why this was so interesting for me. It was interesting because, number one, I listened to a lot of music, from classical music to rock music, and it's always fascinating to listen to what you call the unheard. There are things that you don't normally hear the first time, but then you re-listen and you hear it. And and then the second reason it was interesting for me is that I hike. I don't know if you hike to the mountains. If you keep going up, there's a point where there are no humans and there are no animals, there are no birds. And you would imagine that's silence. You have no idea how noisy the silence of the mountain is, how loud it is. And so then you start realizing the silence is really a human invention. It doesn't exist in nature. So I think it's similar to the conclusions you reached. I mean, if you listen carefully enough, there is no silence.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think that the whole conclusion I got after doing this work is how to think of all these ideologies that are behind the sounds we impose into sound, and what that could mean about ourselves in relationship to others. Yeah.
But it is important. It is important to look for silence because you start listening differently, right? And I think it was the point of John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds. You know, nobody's playing, but there is actually sound. And so there has been a trend towards make you listen better. You know, you mentioned Pauline Oliveros, deep listening. I don't know if you're familiar with the Audium in San Francisco.
Oh yeah.
Right? Stan Sheff found this place where your hearing is augmented just by being forced to focus on sound. So that's very interesting. So I have one question besides my comment. Is there an equivalent to silence in the visual arts? What's a silent painting?
Well, I don't know, maybe this is very subjective, but I try to, when I analyze silence from a public space, and I'm going to be very focused on San Francisco, I think it goes into like white colors and very smooth surfaces, and that's kind of the tendency I see when we interact with each other. And as for a painting, yeah, definitely something that doesn't have a lot of figures or that kind of thing. But in the public sphere, when I associate silence to a visual thing, it's very commercial and very wide and very smooth, definitely.
Okay, you have 3 questions. If you look at the QA, Suyash was asking a question about John Cage. I think we discussed John Cage. You see the question from Curtis.
Have you done a sound analysis of a room full of people? Are there variations at a beer, bass, cocktail party or a concert? Well, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. I am looking forward to do that. Normally, all my observations of sound have been in relation to public and open spaces, because I wanna see how we behave in a space that, as I said, it's for everyone. In another kind of space, I didn't really look into that, but I'm looking forward to investigate on that. Thank you. And there's another question. Do you think that we can use it as a tool to describe city identity, city culture? Definitely. That's the whole point of this. And I guess there's many descriptions as people, but it's a question we should ask ourselves, because we are very determined to think visually on how we navigate the landscape. We are very accustomed to that, but I don't think we are thinking how we play our sonic agencies towards others, how we try to connect with others or isolate ourselves in that sense. Yeah, thank you.
But that is an interesting question, right?
It is.
That's actually, yeah. Okay, thesis for your next degree.
Thank you.
Okay.